Right, okay. So, Chris Morrow, how are you doing?
Doing well, mate. How are you?
I'm not too bad, not too bad. Nice to see your face.
Likewise. Likewise.
Been a
Been a
while, been
while.
a while. Yeah. So what's been happening?
Busy week. Busy couple of weeks. Obviously, the business is busy anyway, and life as a girl dad of three type thing. But it's been busy the last couple of weeks because last Thursday I found out that I'd been invited to the LinkedIn Top Voice program and community, which came as a bit of a shock. So so it's been a bit of a roller coaster, sort of like week or so since that, since finding out that news. So, but I'm
Well,
not complaining.
I did do a little bit of a stat on that. So there's 300 people, I believe, in the world become a top voice, and
Per year,
there's
yeah, yeah.
there's many millions of people on LinkedIn, obviously, but it works out as 0.004% of people on LinkedIn are a top voice,
Yeah.
and Chris Morrow just happens to be one of them. But in
Honestly,
fairness, go on.
honestly, Craig, it says I honestly thought it was a joke. You know, like I thought that I even had a post ready when I found out that they'd made a mistake. I had snapshotted the email that they'd sent me, and I was going to do a post to say thanks very much, LinkedIn, for getting my hopes up, type thing, because I was just genuinely convinced that it was a mistake, type thing. So yeah, not any, never once crossed my mind that I would be chosen for something like that, because like you just said, the odds are just ridiculously small, and in my mind, there's people who are like instantly recognizable, you know, guys like Stephen Bartlett and Bill Gates and Richard Branson and all of that sort of stuff, from people that I'd sort of like looked up to my whole sort of life in business. So yeah, I never once thought it would be me, but super exciting at the same time. So once it settled in and I got
Yeah.
used to the idea, I was like, right, I better get cracking then.
Well, you say that, but you've been cracking for many years, and I know when you started out at Digitalent, and we talked back then about you were going to try a bit of video,
Yeah,
and you've consistently done that for many years, haven't you? So how
that's
did that
right.
feel in terms of the effort you've been putting in over the years to create valuable content, and then getting that announcement? How did that feel after like so many years of doing it like week in, week out?
To be honest, like I said, the major feeling was like just surprise and shock, to be honest, because yeah, when we first met, which was, I think it was like 2017, I had actually been doing video for a couple of years then, but that was back when LinkedIn was, like many social media platforms, giving away a crazy amount of organic reach and the rest of it. So I bought an SDLR camera when I was still in Sydney, and sort of taught myself how to do social media and marketing, because I knew that I always wanted to launch my own business. And I started a blog because I had to find a way, because I was on a temporary visa in Australia. I had to find a way that wasn't gonna be a sort of conflict of interest to my employer. So I had to find a way of like launching a business and launching a website that wouldn't violate the terms of my visa, basically. So I started a
Wow.
blog, and it was all around job search coaching and interview preparation advice for people, and bought this camera. And I used to take the camera literally into work. It was one of those big vlog cameras that sort of Casey Neistat and like YouTubers
Yeah.
like would sort of
Yeah.
like walk around with and stuff like that. So I used to take that into the office and literally plank it on my desk in the office. And it's 100-person open plan recruitment office in Sydney.
Mm.
Everyone thought I was crazy. And I took a lot of stick for it, type thing. So I started playing around with it back then. That was probably like 2014 type
Mm.
thing.
Mm.
And then yeah, so it went from there. But what I always struggled with was like a lot of people with social media is the consistency of it. Because you, and amongst everything else you've got to do with your day job, or if you own your own
Mm.
business and you've got family and stuff, it's actually finding the time to actually do it consistently.
Yeah.
So whilst I started it a long time ago, I was never really truly consistent with it until this year, and I sort of made a decision this year just to go all chips in on it, especially on
Mm.
the video side, because that's what's always kind of worked for me, in the past. And
Mhm.
yeah, doing a start the other day when I was doing a post trying to get my head around this whole LinkedIn top voice thing, and I went back over all the videos that I'd done, and since the start of 2024, I published 80 videos
Wow.
on
Wow.
LinkedIn, and so that's like an average of one every
Yeah.
second day. So when you look at it like that, you think, yeah, that's probably why they've picked it up in terms of the consistency of it. But when you look at things like the engagement, it's never as high as all these other sort of like influencers. So I think
Yeah.
the consistency of it is definitely a key factor. But what was interesting for me, made me a little bit sort of like satisfied, was the fact that it's not an algorithm that picks you, it's a team, it's human beings, and they actually do go through a very thorough vetting process, not just on your LinkedIn content and your profile, but your other social media profiles and everything like that. And they want to make sure that you are worthy of like that
Yeah.
icon of trust and sort of like thought leadership. So that really hit home to me when I found out that. I thought,
Mm.
wow, it's like they've actually vetted me and
It's a
still
human.
decided to go ahead with it, basically.
Yeah. And that you talk about this. You mentioned it a few times, that the word consistency, and it's hard to be consistent, right? It's
Very.
it's it's not easy, and especially with life happens, and you've got work life balance and stuff like that, and they often intertwine. But what's been that? Where does that come from? That consistency? What's like kind of pushing you through it or pulling you through it to be able to publish videos, and even when, like you say, times you don't always get the engagement that you would like, but you
Yeah.
keep going anyway. Where does that come from?
It's a great question. I mean, to be honest with you, it's the videos on LinkedIn really have come from a need to support and drive my own personal brand, because it's been a really tough 18 months for my business, not just my business, but recruitment agencies in general. And the market's really, really tough. Definitely the toughest market that I've ever worked in sort of 20 years. So I felt the need to triple
Yeah.
down on it, because it's what's always kind of worked for me previously. But like you said, it's really difficult to achieve consistency because the algorithm changes a lot.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
what worked for you 3 years ago doesn't work for you today. The engagement's totally different. The amount of, not that I'm not into like vanity metrics with like likes and all of that sort of stuff. It's just really about I suppose the impact that you have and the engagement that you get when people send you messages and they get value from it. So I don't
Yeah.
really count the likes or anything like that, but it does play on your mind, because when you
Hmm.
compare it to stuff you were doing, give you an example, 2014 or 2015, I could put a video up and I could get 50,000 views on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
It
Wow.
was it was
Wow.
crazy, but that's what happens with all social media platforms when they first release video. They give you it for free, they hook you, and then they
Yeah.
start taking it away from you. And then what they want you to do is basically pay for it in the end
Yeah.
by boosting your posts and sort of monetize it that way. But I've always been driven. Um, and determined to kind of succeed. And I've
Mm.
also learnt a lot about, over the last few years, about self-discipline.
Hmm.
So that's a subject that's just like fascinated me over the last 7 years, especially since I came back from Australia and launched Digitalent. I really got into reading quite a few books on the subject. First one was a book called Discipline Equals Freedom by
Hmm.
a guy called Jocko Willink, who's an ex-Navy SEAL commander.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Basically, he wrote that book, and it was all around, sort of self-discipline, what you need to do to instill
Yeah.
self-discipline type thing. So one of the first things I started doing is I started getting up at the crack of dawn, like 5 in the morning, and doing a workout, which is super hard. And it's the easiest, not the easiest is the wrong word, but it's the quickest way to impose self-discipline on yourself is to
Yeah.
get up early in the morning. And
And
then
that
once that becomes a habit, you can then put it into other things like posting videos when you don't want to do it type thing. You can keep it going
yeah.
consistent.
Yeah, I think a word I would associate with you, knowing you for a few years, would certainly be driven. You get that consistency through that, and so long as I've known you, you've always been into personal development. Obviously, this series is about you and people
Yeah,
and stories. Could you give me a little bit more of a background to upbringing, where you're from?
sure.
Because I would like to kind of marry that, the way you are today and your behaviours and your drive. I'm interested in where that comes from.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I was born in Glasgow, as you can probably tell from my
I
accent.
hadn't guessed. No.
I grew up in the East End of Glasgow in a place called Baillieston. Dad was a mechanical fitter in a sausage factory, and he used to fix all the sort of sausage skin machines and everything like that. Really hard working guy. It's definitely where I get my work ethic from. And my mum was a sort of part-time cleaner in a primary school, and she used to work as a barmaid and things like that. So yeah, growing up, we had, my dad was married previously and had two boys, Kevin and Stefan, who are my half brothers. My mum was married previously and had Colin, who's my oldest brother. And Colin's always sort of like lived with me growing up. Kevin and Stefan always lived with their mum, so I used to see them on a weekend and stuff. So, you know, I've got in my head, I've got three brothers. You know, I never would say
Yeah,
they're
of
half
course.
brothers or anything. Just the three brothers. But it was a really challenging upbringing, very eventful. There was lots of things happened in my childhood that most people, you know, it would probably affect them really quite badly. My mum was an alcoholic, and when I say alcoholic, I mean a bottle of vodka a day type level alcoholic. There was lots of, you know, shouting and slamming doors and arguments and things. I remember growing up, and I used to kind of like hide in my bedroom whilst it was all going on. Colin is 13 years older than me, so he was
Hmm.
sort of like out the house by that point. And my dad, I think he just had enough of it. My mum was, I think, quite promiscuous when he was at work and stuff like that as well, which was obviously horrible. And he stayed with my mum for 19 years in the end, but when I was 7, they went through a divorce, and whole sort of like custody battle ensued from there, which was very messy. And one of the first times I think I've ever experienced anything kind of like really traumatic that I remember my dad's friend sitting me down right before the court case was about to happen, and he asked me across the table who I would like to live with. Do you want to live with your
Mm.
mum or do you want to live with your dad? And I just, the whole
Mm.
concept of it just absolutely floored me.
Yeah.
And he kept pushing me for an answer, and I was sort of like, I want to live with both of them, but
Yeah, of
I don't
course.
get it type thing. Basically, what happened there was, you know, like because my mum's alcoholism, you know, her
Hmm.
sister testified against her in the court case. My brother Colin testified against her because they knew the best thing for me would be to live with my dad. And that's what ended up happening. Custody of me, we moved out. I remember actually the day of the court case when my mum found out that she'd lost custody of me. She turned up at primary school, and she pulled me out of class, and she just started crying. You know, she was just hugging me, crying, saying I'm sorry. I honestly didn't know what was going on at the time. She knew that she kind of like lost a little boy at that stage, so it's like really really traumatic and not nice. And then what happened there was I went to live with my dad, not far from where my mum was. It was only like probably about a mile and a half away type thing. And I used to go and see my mum from like Friday 6 o'clock until Sunday 6 o'clock. And she ended up going back to her ex-husband, who was Colin's biological dad, and he was probably twice the alcoholic that she was. You know, he was like something else, and he was a very abusive guy. So when I used to go there Friday, you know, 6 o'clock every weekend at like sort of 5 o'clock, I'd get butterflies in my tummy, and I'd be like, you know, not looking forward to it. But obviously, I wanted to see my mum,
Hmm.
so I used to go, not knowing what you would be walking into, and it would always be, you know, they'd open the door, and the two of them would be absolutely like falling over, steaming drunk type thing, you know. So
Mm.
I kept a lot of that from my dad because I didn't want him to stop me seeing my mum. But I witnessed a lot of things in that house between the ages of like 7 to 12. No child should ever see, you know, like physical beatings. My mum with like fists and big sticks and
Hmm.
crazy, you know. So there was
Mm.
lots of crazy stuff that I remember. One day he used to basically he would sort of get drunk and then go to bed, and he'd be fine before he went to bed, and he'd go to bed in the middle of the day. But when he woke up, he would start swinging type thing. So you could hear the floorboards kind of creaking upstairs, and you think, right, this is it. Your adrenaline would start going type thing. And I remember once whilst he was asleep, my mum is absolutely 3 sheets to the wind, like could hardly stand up, and I put her in the car, and she basically worked the pedals, and I drove the car like steering wheel on a motorway in the slow lane, about 10 miles to get to her house. So you think back and you think, oh my god, that's like, I was probably 9 years old when that happened. Stuff like that. And you just think, my little girl, eldest, now is about to turn 9 in a few weeks, and you think, Christ, it's like, really, really crazy stuff. And fast forward a couple of years, that kind of went on. And then I just started high school. I was 12 years old. I started high school in the August, and it was like March. And I remember playing football down at my mate's house. And normally I would walk home, and it's kind of like up a hill and like sort of through some fields type thing to get to my dad's house. And I wouldn't normally call him and ask him for a lift, but I called him that night. It was a Tuesday, I remember. He was absolutely nice as pie on the phone. No problem, son, I'll come and get you. I'll be right there. And I thought normally he would be like, you effing and blinding, and like sort of like whinging about it. So I put the phone down and I said to my mate, something's not right. Like, something wrong. And he was like, nah, don't be daft, it'll be fine. Sure enough, he picked me up, and when we came at the end of my mate's street, instead of going left to our house, we went right. And I said, where are we going? And he said, we're going to the hospital, your mum's had an accident. Is she all right? And he just sort of shook his head. And she had died. She passed away that day. And it was a sort of like, no one really knows what happened to her. But given the history of it, I'm kind of convinced that her ex-husband was involved in some way. And that was just like, the craziest thing that's ever happened to me. And then he weirdly passed away a year to the day after she passed away. He kind of drunk himself to death type thing, So that's really like, that moment was the moment really that changed everything in my life, because, for a few reasons. Because once the shock of what had just happened had like sort of faded away, I realised that, I had a kind of choice to make. Given where I was in the East End of Glasgow, I was at a particularly like, tough school, 5 really tough areas. Send all our kids there. There was like obviously the Celtic Rangers thing. I was one of like 5 Celtic fans in the whole school of like 1,500. The rest of them are all Rangers type thing. So it was a tough school to be at. But I realised at that moment that I've got a choice, and a lot of people that were looking at me when that happened to my mum were expecting me to go off the rails because of where we lived, because of who lived nearby. Some of my friends that went to school, they were nutters and the rest of it. But I realised at that moment a couple of things that really stuck with me. One, which, not to sound morbid, but it was the first time that I really thought that and realised that I was going to die. In the sense that when it happens to your mum, and you think, oh, it's going to happen to me. And that realisation at 12 years old that it's going to happen to everybody and there's no escaping it. Well, that was a big, big moment for me. And then a few weeks after, sort of like, not coming to terms with it, because I've never come to terms with it, but, when the initial shock sort of faded away, I realised that I was kind of like at a crossroads, and you get 2 choices basically. It's like a T-junction. You can either use what's happened as an excuse and go off the rails, and it was right there. It was so easy to do that, or you use it as fuel and make her proud. You make a better life for yourself, get out of the situation that you're in, and do something meaningful with your life.
It's interesting that you say that. That to make her proud. It sounds like there's some degree of like you've reconciled certain things about your childhood relating to your mom. Are there do you still have things that are unresolved or things that still need reconciling from your experience when you were younger?
Probably lots of things, mate, to be honest. I mean, like, it's never
Yeah.
something I've never talked to anyone about it, like professionally, like a therapist or anything like that. I'm absolutely gobsmacked that I've turned out the way that I am. And I think a lot of
Hmm.
people have, because of what I experienced and because what I went through. I think 99 people out of 100, if they'd have gone through that, they would be probably a bit of a bad egg.
Hmm.
Um, Going back to that word determined, I've always been determined to buck that trend, and I've always wanted to be a good person. Having
Yeah.
said that, I do have my flaws. You know, I am
Hmm.
quick to anger sometimes, and I feel it coming out sometimes with the kids, and I hate that. And I'm always trying
Hmm.
to work on that. But yeah, there's definitely things that, I haven't really thought of. And one of the things that, after thinking about it every day for years afterwards, I was angry with my mum. I was upset. I was, all of those things. But then what I end up realizing really is, because the way that I am as a person is, I would have always, when I graduated from high school, and um, I was 16, 17, 18 or whatever, if my mum was still around, the way that I am as a person, I would have tried everything to try and help her. I felt like
Hmm.
I was too young at 12 and
Hmm.
11 and 10, and I couldn't actually do anything. I wasn't a man, couldn't
Hmm.
help her in her life
Yeah.
type thing, because I wasn't mature enough.
Hmm.
So there's a couple of things. There's a realisation of, you can't really help someone that doesn't really want to be helped. That's the first
Hmm.
thing, because you beat yourself up saying, I could have done this, I could have done that. I couldn't have really. But the other thing is that, if she'd have still been alive when I was 18, I would have probably sacked off things like university. Definitely when I've gone away to Newcastle, uni.
Hmm.
I would have tried to stay and help her, and that would have affected my life in a negative way.
Yeah.
That's just a fact. The craziest thing and it took me a long time to talk about this, by the way, like years and years and years and years. So there's a lot of people that, went to uni with me and probably have known me for years, didn't know anything about that story. One of the things that I realised when I was older was that the worst thing that's ever happened to me was my
Hmm.
mum dying. But in a
Hmm.
really, really odd way, it was actually the best thing that ever happened to me as well,
Yeah.
because it freed me of the burden of what would have happened in later life, which would have been to try and look after her and try and save her,
Yeah. Yeah.
type thing.
Yeah. I mean, I was a bit older when my mum passed away, and it was completely different circumstances. But she died of cancer when I was about 26, and I think my resonating with what you're saying, like it does shape you in a way it can't not shape you.
Yeah,
And I think my biggest thing was I didn't feel like she'd gone, if that
yeah,
makes sense. And there was that for me with it, my biggest thing was just she's not there, but she feels like she's there. And
yeah,
it's, even at the age of 26, I was still quite a young lad. But obviously, you're younger again. And you just mentioned there about, I often think about, who I'm around. I'm the same. I've not really gone and spoke to therapists and stuff like that, but I've definitely always, my whole life, had a support network through my family, my friends, football teammates, and stuff like that. But you mentioned going to Newcastle, and you might not have gone to Newcastle if your mum was still alive. How did your experience, say, going to uni and moving to, say, Newcastle, how did that help shape you, and did that shape you, and what kind of people we were around then?
yeah. I honestly cannot understate the timing of it, of like getting to Newcastle at that time, was absolutely massive for me. That's because what happened in the preceding years is that my dad actually met someone,
Hmm.
um, about a year after, or rather, he introduced me to her about a year after my mum had passed away, and they got married shortly after. But we always had a very tricky relationship. Tricky being a euphemism. She, without getting into too much detail about it, there was definitely she definitely treated me different
Hmm.
and made life quite difficult for me. And that basically led me to, when I was picking universities,
Hmm.
I had the choice of going to Glasgow, Strathclyde, both in Glasgow, obviously, Southampton, which was too far away for my liking, and it was King's College in London, which was too expensive, and then there was Newcastle, and I picked a course which I've still got no idea why I ended up picking this course. I was trying to impress my dad again, who's a sort of like, I'm from an engineering background. I picked naval architecture and marine engineering, and yeah, and I'd never been on a ship in my life. I didn't know anything about boats or anything like that, but that course was all around designing ships, obviously, and those were only 5 unis at the time that offered that course. So I ended up going to Newcastle. When I arrived in Newcastle, I had just turned 18 4 weeks before, so I was a baby, you know. Wet look gel and loads of spots, and had to grow a beard to get into any bars and stuff like that. So you know, but going back to your question, when I arrived there, I was exhausted. I had tried so hard to pass my exams, to get into university, to obviously, like I said, make my mum proud and, you know, make something better of my life. And because of what I just mentioned there about that relationship with my dad's wife, I didn't see any future in me staying in Glasgow, so I needed to get away. When I moved to Newcastle, my dad dropped me off. I remember vividly, we were standing in the queue at the halls of residence, a place called St Mary's College in Fenham in Newcastle.
Yeah.
And we're standing in line to collect the keys, and there's a notice board sort of like, you know, right in front of us type thing. Loads, like hundreds of notices and stuff like that. And there was a notice that just stood out to me, and I was staring right at it. And it said, "Think you're good enough, ? Try out for the university football team." And I sort of read it, and then I looked at my dad, and he was reading the same thing, and he sort of looked at me and just gave us a nod, as if to say, you need to get involved in that. I'd always played football to a high standard, not as high as yourself, but you know, a decent standard nonetheless. And I wasn't even going to go. So the morning of the trial, I wasn't going to go to the trial. I didn't have any football boots with me or anything like that. It was a good mate that I lived with in Halls, a guy called Jimmy, who actually talked me into it. He's like, going into like sports, I think it was Sports Soccer back then, Sports Direct now. He was like, go and buy a pair of boots and get yourself there. So I sprinted, I was late basically. I was the last one. I think there was about 200 or 300 lads that tried out for like 7 or 8 places in the university football team. It was crazy. And I remember everyone sat down and I was the last one there. I managed to get in, and that just really changed so much in my life, because it gave me the lads that I then formed a bond with. We all formed such a close-knit bond with each other. You know, we played football together, we lived together, we were going out 6 nights a week, drinking together, we'd, you know, getting scraps together sometimes. You know, it was like really living in each other's pockets. And they became my brothers, you know, when I lived away, and they were the support network. And you know, after a few beers with a few of them, you know, a few too many beers, I would sort of end up talking about what had happened to me, and they would try and understand, obviously. But yeah, that bond of having lads who were, you know, very much like me, who were living with you, playing football together all over the country on a Wednesday in the uni championships, going out together. It was just like nothing else. It was as close to like a professional football setup as you could get, really, with tons more alcohol obviously involved, being a student. And that's when I met your brother Steve, at the time who came in as a coach in that university football team. Yeah, it was Steve and all the rest of the lads. I just had a tremendous impact on my life at that time, because I needed something to, you know, to kind of hold on to. Really, all my energy was spent getting to uni. I didn't really have a plan for what happened after I got to uni. Sounds crazy, because a lot of people do, but I just didn't have a plan. Just like my ultimate goal was to get away from Glasgow and get into university. And once I did, and once alcohol sort of appeared in my life, I'd never had a beer before I was 18. I made up for it in the first 6 months when I was at university.
Do you find as well, because the way, as you talk about, you know, the lads you were around at that time at uni, and you reference family again in a way. You said it's like, you know, they were like your brothers, if you like.
Yeah.
Do you also feel like you have a setting where you have a support system of people, but also, do you know the physical side of playing football as well? Did that help you? You have you're a ball of energy, right? And I can imagine you as a young kid being a ball of energy.
Yeah, I was
Steve told me.
hyperactive as a kid for sure.
Yes, I think Steve on the lead up to this interview, he did mention remembering seeing you just burst around the pitch. But do you feel like that ability to also physically get certain emotions out through sport and burn that bit of energy off? Was that something that played a part?
Huge. Yeah, you've absolutely nailed that one, to be honest. Like, I don't know actually where I would be without that. That I've always really needed that sort of physical outlet. And that university football team, the year that I got to university, they just won the British University Championships. So it was a
Right.
phenomenal squad, which is why it was so hard to get into that squad. Some of the players that we're playing with were absolutely, brilliant. I remember once we
Mm-hmm.
played, like, I think it was like Newcastle under nines, and Patrick Kluivert's like little cousin or something was playing, and John Carver was like sat. I remember we
Oh, GSC. Oh,
sat
wow.
at the side of the pitch on a milk crate watching the game.
Right.
I remember, and we drew one each with them. So we
Wow.
were a really really good team.
Mm.
And going back to the physical side, we used to train Monday nights with just shuttle runs for an
Mm-hmm.
hour. Really, really hard physically. You could have lads being sick basically every
Mm-hmm.
Monday because of it. You'd have the Busa games on a Wednesday all over the country. We used to go to places like, Bath and Loughborough and up to
Yeah.
Scotland. Really, really good teams you'd play there. And then we would be in the local Tyneside Amateur League on a Saturday. And that was
Yeah.
like rough and ready, and obviously students going to like places that you're getting dogs abuse basically. But the level of fitness, you had to be super fit, and
Mm-hmm.
that gave me definitely an outlet for that energy needs to go somewhere. And
Yeah.
my mum always had a self-destruct button. I've never had really a self-destruct button, but I do have a bit of an addictive personality,
Mm-hmm.
and that addictive personality can go obviously one or two ways, and it really manifests itself with me in a good way
Mm.
now that I've hacked it in my own mind in
Mm-hmm.
that physical side. So now for me it's training in the gym, got a sort of home gym set up, and
Mm-hmm.
running ultra marathons and stuff like that now since I've stopped playing football. But back then
Yeah.
I didn't really recognise that that's what it is. But if I had that, if I didn't have the university football team, that physical side, didn't enjoy being at university, didn't enjoy the
Yeah.
lectures or the education side. I much prefer
Mm-hmm.
the way at school was. You're going from like 25 people in a lesson to 500 people in a lecture.
Mm-hmm.
Never really clicked with me. I'm much happier, working and building businesses and doing sales and things like that. So the thing that kept me there for 5 years, because I did 2 years of a degree, that naval architecture degree, hated it and went back to the start and done an information systems degree, so like computing science. So I was there for 5 years in the end, and that was part of a grand plan as well, because it meant I could play for the uni football team for 5 years instead of 3.
Yeah. I think it's something I resonate with, to be honest. That addictive personality is quite common in people that do like playing sport, and it's something I've seen. Former players, hundreds of them really, that I've known throughout my career, and it is that thing, like you're built a certain way when you play sport, and you
Yeah,
think a certain way, but also when you go through something in your life, at any point in your life, and it needs to come out, right? It needs to come out both in words and to be heard, but then also that physical release as well needs to come out, and it can be a healthy cycle if you, like you've said, if you're doing your ultra marathons and you've got your gym and your stuff like that. And I think it is massively still underestimated how much people just need to physically process that energy sometimes.
yeah,
And sometimes, yes, chatting things through with people is very, very valuable as well. But so is like silence and just being with somebody at times and being in their presence. And I can imagine a whole load of that when you're at uni. But then moving from, say, uni into where you're at now, there's a big gap there. What kind of networks and people and support? I know you mentioned you haven't really done therapy and anything like that, but up to your career now and what makes you today, what other experiences have you had in, say, like the business community of getting support both emotionally And then also, have you done anything like physically with other people in business? Have you done ultra marathons with them? Do you go training with other people? Things like that?
So I've never really had when you talk about like support, the experiences that I had with like my mum and that the abuse that I mentioned earlier, everything that had happened to me when I was younger, it's something that I never really wanted to talk about. So I didn't really seek out a support network for that. It was more having people that were aligned to my way of thinking, my values, I was easy to get on with. Like I said, the lads from the football team really fit that mould for me, at university. And when I graduated university, I was kind of like always really trying to recreate that at the football teams that I went to then. I played for West Allotment Celtic, played for Walker Central, I think when Steve
Walker
was there.
Central?
Yeah, I
Wow.
was a captain at Walker Central when I left university.
Dear me, I didn't know you played for Walker. I played for Walker Central. Brian Clark and
Yeah,
all that. Wow.
yeah. Ian Bogey brought me to Walker Central.
Yeah, he's a Walker lad. Aye. Wow,
Yeah,
he
he brought
boys.
me in, and I didn't get too good of a reception when he walked me in the dressing room right enough because they just spent 5 years playing against me. So I had a few lads like throw their toys out the pram and walk out the dressing room because he introduced me to the dressing room as their new captain. So that was like, yeah, that was the way Ian sort of like operated, which was awesome. But yeah, I was always trying to recreate what I'd found Newcastle Uni with other football teams, and it never happened. I was always trying to get that feeling back where you just sort of so tight with the lads and like you do everything together and stuff. And it's different when you're not at uni and you're not living together and you're a bit older. You're kind of meeting up with them at the weekends and you've all got your different lives and all of that sort of stuff. So I never really sought out the support aspect of it. Really, never really something that entered my mind, because at that point, what had happened with my mum was sort of like, then I was like going back 10 years at that point type thing, so it was becoming more and more distant. It's something that when I started my career in recruitment, when I graduated from uni in 2005, my focus then was shifting on like building a career and becoming successful and becoming really good at my job, because I'm a big believer that you've got to be good at your job to enjoy the rest of your life type thing. So I was in that mindset really. So never really had a support network as such. It was never something that I really spoke to many people about until actually very, very recently. I think my dad and me have probably had one or two conversations since all of that stuff happened, like together about it. We've never really talked about it as such. I've talked to my partner, my fiancée Jez, about it. Obviously, and she knows a lot more, but she came from a very solid family, and it's difficult for someone to understand what's happened there when you come from a family that's so kind of tight knit and stuff. So yeah, but I've always sought out the physical side of things. One thing that really happened to me the first time that I actually realised just how important that physical side was to me was when our eldest daughter Rosie was born. At the time when we found out we were pregnant, we just found out not that long before that Jez's dad had been diagnosed with multiple myeloma, which is a type of blood cancer, and he was given 2 years to live, and we were living in Sydney at that time. We'd moved over there in 2012, and I think it was about 2013 to 2014 we sort of found out about Eric, our dad, and we decided we'd just be engaged. We decided to sort of try for a baby, and thankfully we managed to conceive really, really quickly. What then happened was I was in the middle of pre-season training for Coogee United, another great team who were winning like New South Wales championships and stuff like that when I arrived. And what happened there was I had to basically move from where we were living, because it was right by the beach and it cost a lot of money, to try and save some money. Sort of downsize a little bit. So I had to basically right at the end of pre-season, I remember, and we found out we were pregnant. All of a sudden we're moving house, we don't have a car, so I couldn't make it to the training and all the rest of it. So I basically had to like give up playing football pretty much overnight. And it caused a little bit of which I wasn't expecting, it's a little bit of an identity crisis, to be honest, because everyone who's ever known me has known me as playing football, and all of a sudden I was like, you know, when Rosie came along, I was a new dad. I was just basically getting up in the morning, going to work, coming
Yeah.
home, looking after the baby. You know, I was drinking quite a lot at the time. It was quite a boozy culture in Australia in the office hour, especially on a Friday
Mm.
in Sydney in recruitment. Your beers out in the sunshine and all of that sort of stuff. So I ended up putting on a little bit of weight, which I'd never done before in my life,
Yeah.
and stopped exercising pretty much overnight. And
Mm.
after a few months of that, I was absolutely miserable, to the point where it
Mm-hmm.
was the first time I ever thought that I had anything wrong in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like maybe mental health, or I was thinking that maybe I had depression.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that I had to kind of like, I had to change. That was the first time that I ever had actually realised that that link that you'd mentioned earlier about my personality, potentially what happened to me in the past, and that the need for movement,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because when you're sedentary and you're working, just drinking quite a bit in the weekend, you've got a newborn baby to look after.
Well, it's yeah, absolutely. It's that link as well. You mentioned identity, and I talk about it a lot within, say, people that were, say, ex-professional athletes, footballers, also people
Yeah,
from the forces, the police, and it's also that identity crisis for me. It also comes from when you're in a place where you're part of a team, and say sport, say football in your case. So
yeah,
you start to get that reassurance about yourself, I suppose, that you're becoming a person who's well balanced. You're getting that energy out. You know, you've got a bit of a sport network. So then also when you stop playing sport, people forget like how much you miss, because it's a feeling you get as well, isn't it? It's the feeling of feeling healthy. It's the
yeah,
feeling of burning off energy, and it's way much more than just oh, I play football. It's like when you play football, you're a certain person, a certain type of person that feels a certain way, and when that's moved and you're no longer that identity, you no longer have them feelings anymore. It is
yeah,
it is a gap to fill, and unfortunately, some people do turn to alcohol and drugs and other problems. But like you said, I think it's a huge thing, especially professionally. You know,
yeah,
when I went from being a footballer into a businessman, I did miss that massively. And it wasn't until I got back into just going to the gym, and then there was a bit of an identity again. But it was an identity that made me feel good as well.
yeah.
So I think it's, it doesn't have to be football. Naturally, it could just be going for a run or a walk with somebody. But it does build a certain identity, and when it's removed,
Yeah, I've
it's
always heard
missed.
of it in like obviously professionals, which I wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting to feel like that when I stopped playing.
Yeah,
I think it was because it was so sudden, and I didn't have a
yeah,
plan for what I was going to do post that hole in my life
yeah.
being there, because it is a hole, because it's like it's somewhere you go every week at a certain time, you do something you're really really good at, and people associate you with being good at that. It's not just that you go and do it, it's like just other people see you as being really good at that, whatever it is. It, you know, it can be a sport or whatever.
Hmm.
But when it's suddenly just gone, you don't have anything else to fill that void. It catches you by surprise type thing, you know. And the
Mm.
thing that caught me off guard was the mundane. I'm just literally getting up in the morning, going to work, and coming home, looking after a newborn baby, you know, nursing
Hmm.
a hangover. It just seemed like I was, is this it? This is it. This is all I've got to
Yeah.
look forward to,
Yeah.
type thing.
And
So
and
it
I
was really,
suppose as well that when you remove that element of say playing football or having that physicality, and you gain another identity as a dad, and a remarkably good dad from what I know of you with twins,
thank you.
you're gaining an identity that you absolutely want, right? And you
Yeah,
want to be a fantastic dad, and it makes absolute sense from your childhood why you would want that, why you have that drive as well. But then, as I know, and as you well know, with twins, the energy that takes, and the mental energy that takes and capacity, and then you've lost the physical side of sport. I can see how that must have been a incredibly like challenging time, but in good ways. You know, you're becoming a dad of twins, but at the same
yeah,
time, where'd you get your respite? Where'd you get your rest? Where it's something that I think is quite a common problem, especially with people that are driven professionally as well, because there's
yeah.
only so much time in a day, and when you've got twins and you're not doing your sport, but just touching on you being a dad, can you tell me a bit more about like how that felt to you as well, even though challenging and tiring? How did that feel for you in terms of you've grown up, and it seems to me you were looking for to be noticed by your parents and I suppose your stepmom in some way, and then now you're in that position. How is that shaping you as a dad? Like from your experience being younger and maybe not
Mm.
having certain stability, how's that shaping you now? Do you find it sometimes that you might overthink being a dad?
I mean, I wouldn't say I overthink being a dad. I see it as a tremendous privilege, a
Mm-hmm.
massive responsibility, something that I like live and breathe for. When Rosie arrived, the context is everything. I always say to everybody, like, it's the context of that moment that was the really key thing. The context was we were living in Sydney. We had no support, with no one round, no grandparents to drop the baby off at, and like we had to basically figure out parenthood 11,500 miles away from any family members. So again, doing it tough. It was like we were literally dropped in the deep end. We just had to figure it out. But I remember the very first time I held my daughter, and just like the feeling of like pure love, indescribable, like, and the wave of like, oh my god, I'm actually responsible for this little human being, and just like something in my head just like switched, and I thought, right, yeah, this is it, type thing. And but it was also tempered with sadness in that my mum was never going to be there, and she's missed out on well, not just that, but a lot of key moments in my life, which was also really sad at the time. I remember thinking, I gave Rosie her middle name, so her name's Rosie's name's Rose Joan Morrow. My mum was called Joan.
Nice.
As a little tribute. But yeah, the parenthood thing was like unbelievable when it happened, but also super tough because of that context I just mentioned. Being in Sydney, it's not like being around loads of family, and like you said, that support network there was none really. So when we ended up moving back from Sydney in 2017, we made the decision to move back to the UK because everything that was happening with Jez's dad, we didn't want to regret later on in life not making the move just purely because we lived somewhere that was sunny, and you were basically trading sunshine for friends and family, and that's what you boil it down to. So when we moved back, we moved in with Eric and Yvonne, Jez's mum, and we had myself, Jez, Rosie as a 2-year-old and a cat, and we moved into a house where someone's basically receiving cancer treatment, and who's approaching the last sort of like twilight years of their life. It's a super tough situation to be in. Jez is also 3 years older than me, so when we were there for probably about maybe 6 months or so, we were saying to each other, is Rosie going to be an only child, or are we going to try for another? Like, again, we made the decision to try. Still haven't talked about getting married at this point. We were just sort of like, let's try for another baby, and ended up finding out we were having twins, which was honestly the craziest surprise. That it's one of those things that you never think will happen to you. Basically, yeah, that was like the craziest time ever. And again, going back to the context, at that moment we were driving around in Yvonne's, we're borrowing her Mini Cooper. So whenever we went anywhere, we had a buggy in the back. It was Rosie's buggy because she was only 2, and we had no room for like bags of shopping or anything because it was a mini. So we're driving around in her car. We had no furniture because we were renting in Australia. That's what you do over there. Most people are renting that are expats and stuff. So when we arrived back, we had suitcases and that was it. So we didn't have any furniture, cutlery, sofas, beds, nothing like that. We didn't have a house. Obviously, we were living with them. So we had, as soon as I found out I was having twins, I thought, I need to buy a house. I need a big car. I need 2 big cots. I need the double buggy. All those things. It just, my brains were like all over the wall type things. I just, the realisation that Digitalent was only probably 8 or 9 months old at the time. So yeah, everything just came at once there. But the parenting aspect for me has become, it's an all-consuming, thing. There's I'm a different person now in so many ways. In that, we having twins by themselves is challenging. But having twins in an older one is like next level in many ways. Really, really tough logistically to try and manage that. And shortly after they arrived, we had COVID and all of that sort of stuff. So it's really challenging. I have had to adapt my life a lot to be the best version of myself and be the best dad that I can be. And one of those things recently is giving up alcohol. I've sort of dabbled with giving up alcohol since Rosie was born. And we started it when Jez was still pregnant with Rosie, and I went like 89 days without having a beer.
Yeah.
And then every year since then, I've kind of had a few months off, 3 months here, 4 months there, 6
Yeah.
months, type thing. And at the moment, like as of today, I've not had a beer for almost 400 days, so well over a year.
Impressive.
And that just helps with everything.
What to anybody listening or watching this right now?
It's a good question. I mean, the first thing I would say is you have to be doing it for you. Ultimately, everything it starts with making a decision. Really, it's not like you. I think always in the early days when I used to start dabbling in it, I would say I'm going to try. I'd use what language, like I'm going to try this, and I'm going to try to. And I'll give this a go. And I switched the language, and when I got really serious about it, I would start saying, I would be talking a lot more definitively. I'd say I'm not drinking this month, or I'm not drinking this year, or I'm doing a challenge with myself. Because what you'll find is the most difficult thing is your friends who know you, and they have a certain personal brand of yours in their mind, with like associated with like going out on a Friday or a Saturday and having loads of drinks and having a good time and all of that sort of stuff. So sometimes it's the people closest to you who will struggle with it the most, and it's the only, as is a famous phrase, it's the only drug that you have to justify not taking. So it's really difficult in terms of peer pressure to actually get that right in your head, because people always say, "Oh, just have the one." We're not having one.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So just have the one. So it's a really difficult thing. My advice would be to start off as small, like have a week off, have 2 weeks off.
Yeah.
The first 2 weeks, 2 weeks to like 3 months are actually really, really difficult, because you still have the urge to. What I found was, like, I would work really hard and I would tell myself a story. I'd be like, you deserve this. You deserve a beer because you've worked so hard. It's like it's the narrative that you have with yourself. So you have to be careful of how you kind of talk to yourself about alcohol and what your relationship is with it. But I would say things like that to myself. Working in recruitment's an emotional roller coaster most of the time. So it's like you can be up high as a kite one day and like literally lower than a snake's belly the next type thing. So you sort of like you sort of take the edge off that in recruitment by having a beer, like after work on a Friday and stuff like that. So it
becomes kind of like a bit of a cultural thing in certain I suppose sections of your professional life. It was similar about when I was a footballer. We were almost binge drinkers really, because you couldn't drink like when you had games. So the one time you got a day off, you'd all go out and hammer it, and you were all right. Like I think there's a few times I've had a break for like 6 months to a year away from alcohol. And to be honest, I just posted on Facebook that I was going to have a few months off, and that kind of made it easier for me. And I became the designated driver, so I had that different identity to it. I was like, "Oh, Dave can drive us," and then nobody offered me a drink. And that was quite helpful.
Yeah.
But I think you are right. It is what you said there. It's the only drug you're not. You feel like you have to justify to stop taking
because people are just they're almost like offended that you're not drinking, and it's like a default, like, "Oh, go on, why are you being like that? You're being boring," like all of this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will buckle on that. One other thing I would say about advice in terms of like not drinking is the biggest thing that worked for me was getting up early in the morning. If you get up at, I do that now. I've been for the last sort of like ever since I came back from the UK, to the UK, sorry, I've been getting up at 4:30, 5 a.m.
Yeah.
That's purely because people think it's like I'm trying to be like some sort of like hustle culture. It's not really that.
Yeah,
It's
I know what
actually
you mean.
the family situation dictates that the only time I get to myself, and I work from home and most of the time as well, the only time I actually get to myself where demands aren't put on my time is super early in the morning. So to get up at that time is so difficult. And everything in your body's not wanting to get up. You're comfy and lying in your pillow, and especially in the dead of winter, and you've got to come down to like a freezing cold garage, which doesn't have central heating, by the way, and your hands are sticking to the bar, and you're literally lift weights and stuff. It's super tough. But when you get up at 5 in the morning, or 5:30 or 6 or whatever, and you beast yourself for an hour and a half in the gym, or an hour, you want to eat well. Do you know what I mean? And when you're eating well, you want to gets to like 9 o'clock at night and you are knackered. You want to go to bed. because you're getting up again
Yeah.
early in the morning
Yeah.
the next day. And that becomes a protective cycle then, because you're working so hard at 5 a.m., 6 a.m. when you're training, that you're going to bed super early because you're knackered. You're not staying up until 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, having beers or going out or like whatever. So I found that the biggest hack for me is getting up early and doing a workout 5 times a week is the biggest hack for me, because that's the thing that dominoes everything else for me. It means that I eat properly. It means that I'm going to bed earlier than I would be normally, because you can't be going to bed at midnight and getting up at 5 a.m. and expecting to have a great day. You've got to have I've got to have 7 or 8 hours sleep. So that's another bit of advice, that if you're really serious about it, start off small. But if you really want to do it properly, if you can get up early in the morning, like super early before most other people, you go to bed earlier. And if you go to bed earlier, you're not staying up late and drinking. You're focusing on like health and fitness.
That's true. With regards to you today, right? So I think your story's remarkable, and to be honest, I didn't know a lot of this, and I've known you for quite a while. What are the 3 words that have come to mind that describe who you are today? Just 3.
Question: driven, compassionate, loving are the 3 words. It's interesting because recently I did some coaching, and I think it was last year, with a really good friend of mine, Chloe Quinn, who runs a business called Tilt People Practice, and she was a sort of chief people officer at our biggest client in the UK with DigiTalent, and then she set up her own coaching business, and I had the privilege of being her first sort of like client on that side, and went through, never done any coaching before, and got such a hell of a lot out of it, to be honest. And never really thought of, before Chloe started her business, that I would ever do any coaching, because I almost thought there was almost like a negative stigma attached to coaching when it comes to like leadership and business almost type thing. But totally misunderstood it, if I'm honest. And when I started doing it, the first session, I just thought, oh my God, that I can see me, the type of person I am as well, getting so much out of this. And there was one exercise that she made me do, which was similar to the question that you've just asked me there, which was go away and ask like people that know you and love you, and you know that they'll give you a straight up answer, no BS. Ask them what 4 adjectives they would use to describe you. And I thought, what? I've never even thought of that question. It's never something that you actually do. You know, imagine going to like, you know, your brother or you like your dad, and it's not something you would ever just say to them like on a Monday. Oh, by the way, what you know? They'd be like. So I had to do this exercise, and I asked my brothers, I asked my dad, I asked obviously Jez, some of my best mates, and they obviously didn't know about each other's answers, or they weren't conferring with each other. But the answers that came back were really shocking in a way that they were so similar. Loads of people mentioned that I was driven. I mean, when I was doing my ultra marathon and I was going round, and there was people telling me that maybe I wasn't going to make it because I'd injured my knee at like mile 15 and stuff like that, and then they sort of saw the look in my face when I was like gobsmacked that they would even suggest it type thing. And I had about 6 people on the way around that race saying, you are unbelievably driven. Like, I can just see it's pouring out of you. And I was just like, and everyone kind of seems to notice that about me. So it was interesting for me to see other people's perspective on that. But that's not just all that I am. It's, there is a massively compassionate and empathetic side to me, and something that I always try and teach my children is, empathy and understanding and care for others. I think it's such a valuable thing in the modern world, if you can, have compassion. And then I mentioned love, and that's something that, my family and people that know me are always recognising, because I'm a very loving person, everything like that. But I thought I'd mention that because that exercise was a real eye opener for me, because it's like when you write them all down on the same bit of paper, there's a link there. My dad mentioned intense. I was intense, and I remember laughing when I heard that, because I thought it could either be like a good thing or a bad thing type thing. When someone's intense, they're a bit like, he's intense. But I recognised myself when as soon as he said that, I thought, I get that. Like, because I can be driven to the point where I'm just like, sort of probably a
It
bit
comes back.
annoying.
It comes back to that energy, doesn't it? That we talk about that you've got, and the need to, to mold that energy and release that energy and burn that energy off. But also, there's the positive side of that because the energy also makes things happen. That
Yeah,
in that can. I mean, I think intense is a good word. It's something that means you're serious, and it's a movement of force or energy, isn't it? Intense. So it does match up with you. And I think coaching, at its fundamental roots, is about the performance of another person, right? And one of the biggest things, because I still get coaching myself today, and I have done for a long, long time. But I think the big thing is it's just you've got a person to empty your thoughts with and just have a look at it. And
yeah,
it's a good way to do it. It's very hard to do that on your own. I mean, you can journal, you can do all these things, but having another human being to just offload and to discuss things through, and set some structure, some accountability to it, and routine
yeah.
to it is helpful. But I think its most basic helpful level is just the fact that you have another human being to just interact with, to
Yeah.
figure out your thoughts. That's
I,
coaching.
I totally agree with you there. The biggest thing for me was that I was trying to taking part in coaching. I was trying to develop myself, but
Yeah.
I couldn't really develop myself if I wasn't acutely self-aware
Yeah.
of who I am and where I was at
Mm,
and what I was like, to other
mm,
people and myself and my habits and everything like that. So I think you have to kind of like really study yourself first, and having someone there as a coach, someone to really allow you to be objective in the way that you
mhm,
view yourself and
mhm,
maybe probe you in certain ways and hold you accountable, for things. Honestly, I never thought going into that experience that I would get so much out of it. And it was
mm,
absolutely phenomenal for myself because it allowed me to. I mean, I thought I was self aware previously, but there was so much to it that I hadn't really realised. And
mm,
it allowed me then to identify some of the areas of my life and my professional life and the way that I structure my time and how I
mm,
communicate with people and things like that I can
mm,
then improve upon.
mm.
And that was really really helpful, is like I said, having someone almost to sort of like
Yeah.
mirror your ideas, who isn't there to judge and
Mhm,
and is sort of there as a bit of a sounding board, and
mm,
pulling at threads when they appear. I just found that really really fantastic, and Chloe was amazing
mm,
at that, which was a new dynamic in our relationship, because previous to that, obviously, she was a friend that I've known for 20 odd years and stuff, but
mm,
she was a client as well. So I was used to a
mm,
very different relationship with her previous to that coaching. But yeah, I couldn't recommend it enough. That whole
mm.
professional coaching, leadership coaching was a game changer for me in a lot of ways.
Well, it'd be interesting to check back in with you in 6 months for another chat on all that, because I think your story so far has been like super interesting, remarkable in many ways. I understand a lot more about you from sharing that, so I do appreciate you sharing that. And I think it would be nice next time to get into a bit more of your digital and stuff. But to be honest, this is all about like finding out about you and who you are. And it's
Yeah,
funny, you can know people for a long time, but not really know them, if that makes sense,
yeah.
on this kind of level. And I think a lot of people will get a lot of value out of what you've said. And thanks for sharing your story. And I wish you all the best with the kids
Thank you.
and all of that. Have you got I'd say, any other things, or one more thing about you? It could be completely random, could be a bit of fun. Anything else that is something about you that nobody knows? Testing you.
This is a tough one. Something about me that nobody knows. Well, actually, my wife's sick of hearing this story. My wife to be rather sick of hearing this story. But just as a little quip, I actually sang on stage at Glastonbury, which not
Right,
many people know.
right,
I went
right.
there.
Well, that was a good
I
answer.
went. Yeah, I went to Glastonbury with my mates. I don't even know if this
Right.
is the type of thing you were after, by the way, but we're
No,
here
it's
now.
perfect.
And I wanted to see this DJ called Nick Warren, right? And I went to this area, the festival that I knew he was going to be at, which the name escapes me, which because obviously such a. I don't know if you've ever been to Glastonbury, it was absolutely
No.
humongous. And so goes there, and I see this guy with a clipboard who looks a bit official, and he's like writing on this clipboard, but he's dressed like one of the Queen's men out of like Alice in Wonderland. So he's dressed like a pack of cards. He's got a top hat and stuff. He's got like fancy dress on. So I went over to him and I said, "Mate, do you know where Nick Warren's DJing?" And he sort of hit out with an expletive and said, "Never mind Nick Warren, do you want to sing a song?" And I was like, "Where?" And he went, "Do you know that big stage right there?"
Yeah,
And it was like a big tent. It was probably like 3,000 people in this tent. And I was like, "Are you joking?" And he's like, "No." He goes like, "Have a look at it." He gave me the clipboard and it's got all the names of songs and stuff on there. And the first one that I saw, which was the only one that I really recognised because there's loads crossed out, was Oasis Live Forever. And he said he'd come back in half an hour and we'll get you up. And it was called Rocky Okie. So it was a live band and basically people singing the song. So when I came back half an hour later, fairly well oiled at this point. Obviously you're in a festival and been drinking all day and stuff. So I goes back and the place had gotten about 10 times busier than when I was there half an hour before. And it's because Michael Eavis, who's the owner of Glastonbury, he runs like the Glastonbury Festival, or he did before he passed it over to his daughter, and he owns the farm, Worthy Farm where Glastonbury is. He was on right before me singing Frank Sinatra My Way. So everyone had found out about this and flooded this tent. And then obviously I was up next basically and absolutely murdered this Oasis song. I got like messed up the start. I started too early and all of that sort of stuff. But it was, and I almost bottled it as well before I went on stage. And almost bottled it. And the guy sort of grabbed me and said, "This will be one of the best things you've ever done in your life, and you'll be able to tell people about it."
Well, if you'd have started with that point, we could have had a little cheeky song, but we're out of time now.
Definitely not a singer. I mean, I actually started off saying in the song, I said, "This is for everyone at Glastonbury who can't sing." That's what I said at the start of the.
You need to have a little badge. You need to have another little badge on your LinkedIn next to top voice and Glastonbury headliner here, don't you?
Glastonbury, yeah. Headliner. Yeah, there's not that many. The guy did say to me, "Do you know how many people have sang at Glastonbury?" Not that many. So I was like, right,
I like that.
I've got a video of it somewhere, but it looks like it's been filmed on a potato because it's gone back about 10 years.
Well, I might ask you to dig that out. I think I'm gonna take that question into the next episode. I'm gonna ask for the most random, facts about people, and that's going to be quite tough to beat. But listen, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. It's our first episode, and I think you've given us a lot there. You've given a load of value. You'll help a load of people. You've certainly helped me. I think from what you've spoke about and you've shared, it is important to us that we respect it, we listen to it, because it's not easy for other people to tell their stories sometimes, and people don't always have to tell their stories, but you will help somebody somewhere with that. And thanks for your time. All the best with the kids in the business, Digitalent, and I look forward to seeing you on Glastonbury again soon.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to say thanks very much for inviting me on the podcast. It's been brilliant to.
Great. Thanks a lot, pal.
Cheers.
Take care.